everybody, my name is Caitlin from embroidery, and this video is going to be about how to do the whipped backstitch for the lettering on this pattern. And I have this pattern for sale in my Etsy if you'd like to buy it and stitch along with me. So as you can see, I already started. I did this yesterday and then I ran out of light for filming, so I'm back today. But as you can see, the whipped backstitch creates this really nice, smooth, twisted effect for the lettering that I really like. It's similar to the stem stitch, but I personally find it easier to get that smooth line than with the stem stitch. I feel like with the stem stitch, if you don't do it perfectly, you can sometimes see the ends of your stitches poking out, and with this, it kind of blends it all together a little bit better. And hopefully you'll see what I mean. So I'm using 2 strands, and I've got it knotted at the end, and you can see I already started. And the whipped backstitch has 2 parts. The first is, as you might have guessed, the backstitch. And the backstitch goes for each element first, and then you'll weave your stitches through the stitches you made with the backstitch. So I'm gonna do the backstitch first for this E, and I generally like to do it 1 letter at a time. I find that it wastes less thread and it's more efficient. So what I mean by that is that I'll do the backstitching for 1 letter, and then I'll do the weaving through that backstitching for the 1 letter, and then I'll move on to the next letter. So that's what I'm going to be doing in this tutorial. You can also do all your backstitching first all the way along for all the letters, and then go back through and do the weaving of the whipped backstitch. It really does not matter. This is just personal preference. So I'm doing nice tiny stitches for the curve of this E. The smaller your stitches are, the better you'll be able to convey that curved line, and the less it'll look pointy. And I'm just coming up a stitch length away, and then coming back down through the same hole in my previous stitch. Okay, so that's my last stitch here. So now I've got the E totally done in backstitch. So to do the whipped backstitch, you come back through the end of your line right here, and you weave it through each one of your stitches, going the same way every time. So I'm gonna go in from, if you look at it this way, it's the left. So I'm gonna go in from, you can also think of it as like the outside, and I'm not piercing the fabric at all. My needle is simply going under my previous stitch, and it's not piercing the fabric. And I'm just weaving it through like that. And then I'm gonna go to the next stitch, come around, go in and under again. So I won't pierce the fabric the entire time that I'm doing this until I get to the end of a line. So I weave using the pointy end of the needle. Sometimes I find that my stitches are too tight to fit the blunt end, but it can be useful to use the blunt end if you're worried about catching on other stitches, because you're a lot less likely to catch that way. So you can do it either way. I'm just going to come around and keep weaving under each stitch, and I haven't pierced the fabric this whole time. This is all happening on top of the fabric. I've got 2 more stitches. See, I find that that stitch is a little bit tight. So I just use the pointy end, and I'm very careful. And I actually push the fabric up from underneath using this finger to create a sort of bump like that, so that I can keep the needle from hitting any of the other stitches. So last one. And the point that I'm at right now is the end of the line of the E. I could curve and continue to do this line, but it would create this sort of curved effect, and I really like this point that the E hits. So to keep that point, I'm going to go down into the fabric, and I'm finally piercing the fabric at this point. I'm going through the fabric. And then I still need to do the whipped back stitch for this line. So I'm actually going to come up on the other side of this line. And I'm going to go through here, and then I don't want this to sit on top of the whipped back stitch I just did. I want it to go underneath. That's just a stylistic choice. The way that you naturally write an E, this line would be below that line, so that's the way I like it to look when I'm stitching. Again, that's just personal preference, but to get that effect, I'm going to put my needle under the weaving I did of this curve, and then I'm going to continue the whipped back stitch now that I'm on the other side. I'm going to continue here. And then I've reached the end of this line again, and I'm going to pierce the fabric again. So that was the entire E, doing the whipped back stitch, and then I'll move on to the M, doing the same thing for each line. So the first straight line, this curved line, and then this curved line, I'll do the back stitch, and then I will do the whipped back stitch. And for back stitches, as a general rule, the straighter your line is, the longer your stitches can be. So for example, for this straight spot, I did just 2 stitches, that's plenty. And then I'll come in and weave the thread through for the whipped back stitch, just through these 2 stitches, like so. And then pierce the fabric again. But then for the curvier spots of this M, I'm going to make much smaller stitches. These are a half or even like a third of the length of the stitches I just did, so that I can follow this curve and actually make it look like a curve instead of just like a triangle basically. So I'm making these very small stitches, and they are a little bit harder to weave through, but it's worth it to get that nice smooth curve. So then I finish this line with the back stitch, and I'm going to weave it through. So when I'm doing the whipped back stitch, I like to go in the direction where I'm starting on the outside of a curve, if there is a curve, and weaving in towards the inside. I find that that helps support the curve to stay curved out, and I find that if I weave starting from the inside and going out, it can pull this curve in and pull it more straight. So when I do the whipped back stitch, that's how I always try to do it, is to go from out to in. You saw me do that on the E as well. I went from outside of this curve to the inside when I was weaving. So again, I'm doing that here. And for these tiny stitches, I'm using the pointy end of the needle and just being very careful to not catch any of my other stitches. And then piercing the fabric again, and coming up through again to do this part of the M. So in the pattern, I said to use 2 strands, and when you're trying to choose how many strands to use, it's important to think about how thick you want your line to be. And with the back stitch, with the whipped back stitch, your line is going to be twice as thick because you're making the back stitch with 2 stitches, and then you're doing the whipped part of the whipped back stitch with 2 stitches. So each line is 4 strands thick, if that makes sense. that's all my whipped backstitch tips. I'm going to stitch the rest, and feel free to stitch along with me. So I've reached the end of my thread, and I'm just going to go ahead and knot it off in the back. I don't do that any fancy way. Sometimes I'll take the needle and kind of thread it through these back stitches, but usually I just tie a knot. And that's that. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. And just let me know if you have any questions about the whipped back stitch.